Welcome to the Stupide Podcast episode something. What is your question?
So, welcome. What I wanted to ask you is, so protocol-wise, at night you have protein for dinner. So how do you choose which protein works best for you? And where would you go for if you're looking for certain benefits or maybe certain personality types? So how do you choose your best protein, basically?
So the key when you look at the protocol is always the same, is digestion.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so the key is digestion happen on the parasympathetic side, yada yada yada. The key will be digestion. It makes no sense to absorb a food you cannot digest. I would think by now, most of the conversation about nutrition would be based on digestion first. But for whatever reason, it does not. That I'm always puzzled that they don't go at that one first. Anyway, so it's not the food you ingest, it's the food you digest. So that means that we have to understand how the things work. We think that when we eat, naturally, we go toward the parasympathetic side in order to digest. In a vacuum, yes, but you also exist in the world, and in the world there's an environment, right, that might put you into the wrong state. So if your environment puts you into a sympathetic state, it's going to weaken your digestion. It requires you to be toward the parasympathetic to have a free-flowing digestion. If you go sympathetic, stress, or anything that triggers a sympathetic response, the blood will not go toward the stomach acid will not be released the same way. There's going to be a number of actions that are taking place that will not let you digest the protein correctly, which means it's going to fall into your colon, and undigested protein is actually extremely harmful to you. It kills the good gut flora, and it has been shown to be to create a number of health issues. So it's very important to digest protein well. So if we look at digesting protein correctly, we see two sides. We see the importance of the state that you're in. So if you're in the sympathetic state, for example, like you have a large steak and you get stressed out, that's why you feel nauseous. It's because it's actually your body wanting to puke the steak, so that because it cannot deal with the steak and with the nervousness at the same time. Which makes sense, because sympathetic state means that your environment is dangerous to you. That means that the bear is coming. If the bear is coming, I need blood in my muscles, not in my stomach. Mm-hmm. So therefore, I eject what is in my stomach so that I can fight the bear coming up. We see that with snakes. When they absorb, if there's something happening to them, they'll puke whatever they eat so that they can take off. So we are not that much more evolved than that. We are, but conceptually we're not. And so it's very important to understand that if I have protein in my system and I get stressed out, I will not be able to hang on to that protein. So that means I'll want to throw it out one way or the other. So that's why you can have diarrhea or stuff like that when you're stressed out. It's because your body trying to eject the food as fast as it can. So if it's not digested, you throw up. If it is, you go the other way. Right. So your state matters a lot. So anything that triggers a sympathetic response will not be beneficial to you eating protein. So that means sugar triggers a sympathetic response, alcohol trigger that, drugs, stress. There's a number of things that will not help toward digesting protein. We had a client who tested his capacity to digest protein, and before the protocol he was at 20%, by the end of it he was at 80%. So what does it matter? Because it means that you can eat 4 times less protein and get the same amount of nutrients in your body. If you eat less food for the same amount of protein in your system, you can imagine how much more efficient that is. That means you do not put stress on your organs. A number of things happen that are good for you. That would make sense, right? And yet no one is looking at it like that. So on the other side, not all proteins are the same. Fish is not chicken, chicken is not meat. So what I need to have is a digestibility table. Like what is the easiest to digest versus the hardest to digest. The hardest to digest, it's easy, it's lean red meat. That's right on top. That's going to be much harder to digest. And then you work your way down. Then you're going to have chicken, right? And then you're going to have fish. Like salmon is probably the easiest thing to digest. So that means that I'm going to have to look at my capacity for digestion. Do I have low or high stomach acids? Am I always stressed out? Right. So first of all, my genetic stuff. Do I work at night? Do I digest well? Yeah. That's going to tell me if I'm going to favor fish or chicken or red meat. Then after that is my day is going to change that. Am I in a stressful period at work where I get home and I'm like this? So I have two choices. Is either I'm going to learn to calm down before dinner to put myself into a sympathetic state. That's why walking around for 20 minutes, doing nasal breathing before dinner is so good. It puts you into the right state. Culturally speaking, we know that because it used to be that you go home and your mom is cooking dinner and where does everybody meet normally? In the kitchen. Mom is cooking, the smell, or grandma is cooking, the smells are there because she spent all day. The kids are there. It's a place of socialization. The kitchen has always been the most important room in the house. That's where grandma was there preparing with, like the smell is great. So, like you spend 30, 45 minutes in the kitchen talking, socializing, stuff like that. Your stomach starts to growl a little bit. You are getting ready to eat. You're putting yourself into a parasympathetic state, which is a, which is the best thing you can do before you eat. So since we have lost that group dinner with, like 10 kids and, 10 people at the table, going around for a walk for 20 minutes doing nasal breathing is a great way. It's not the same, but it's a great way to get there instead of rushing to eat while being on social media, while talking about Trump with your crazy uncle, stuff like. How many times, like now that it was Thanksgiving in the US, you know what I'm talking about. You're always that crazy uncle that said racist shit and talk about Trump, and you're so stressed out you can't eat. That
you get angry and
now you can't eat, and now you can't digest anymore, right? So you can only digest in those moments. You can only digest carbs because carbs are a lot easier to digest than protein is. Because carb is the fuel, protein is not. Protein is not a fuel. So that means that you're going to have to see two things. First of all, what is your natural capacity to digest protein versus the state you're in. If you're always stressed out, then we're going to want to go towards salmon, white fish. If you train hard and heavy, but you're fairly relaxed, then the lean red meat will be good. And then the lean red meat is going to put you to sleep because it's going to favor that parasympathetic response as long as you don't go sympathetic, and it's going to help you heal better because healing happens on the parasympathetic side. Mm-hmm. So there's a two-way street that plays there.
Maybe that's a stupid question, but
it's a right podcast.
Exactly. You can't, for example, say, well, I want to sleep well tonight. I'm going to eat a big steak and I'm going to...
It might work once, but then it's going to become a fix. And then by the third time, your body has caught up. And then it's going to go, no, it doesn't fix anything because your life is still shit. And so you're going to be stressed out and the steak is going to stay right there. And you're going to have a horrible night, not sleep well, and wake up like shit the next day. You can't use anything as fixes. That's not how this works. Mm-hmm. So what I found very interesting as well is I've noticed that, and more toward people on the spectrum, but that's another podcast, is that everything is dosage, right? So what I've seen out of people that were starting to stress out and crash is that they always had carbs, mm-hmm. but then the carb went past a certain quantity. And when that quantity is reached, we see a decrease in the amount of protein they have at night. And I can always tell from the ratio protein at night versus carb during the day where people are. If they are more stressed out, they'll have more carbs. Why? Because stressing out is a sympathetic reaction that needs to feed itself. Otherwise, prediction observation, you get more anxious. So to be less anxious, I need my environment to match the way I see it. So what do? I increase the carbs because it increases the sympathetic reaction. Yeah. What's very interesting about that is the second you start pushing the carbs like that, the world becomes meaner to you.
So you go in a loop.
You go in a loop because that's what the sympathetic is. If you look at snakes, the sympathetic is a response to go enemy, let me fight them. So then literally as you go up in carbs, the world becomes meaner. You start to see threats more accurately, but is the glass half full or half empty? If you
Start
want to
to
see
become
threats, you're going to
maybe-
find them.
Yeah.
There's always some. So your approach, the way you see the world is a reflection of your character. So as the carbs start to feed the sympathetic, which is already why you're having carbs, you start to go in the loop where the world is more and more aggressive, you see more and more threats, you feel worse and worse. As we see the carbs go up, we start to see the protein go down. I've seen that every time because that sympathetic now is starting to take over, which means its enemy in that case would be the parasympathetic, because one of the role of the parasympathetic is to put a handbrake on the sympathetic. But this sympathetic is winning because the prediction is saying the world is a mean place, which is why I started the carbs in the first place. So now the prediction wanting to win, take over the sympathetic that is starting to fight the parasympathetic and therefore decreases the amount of protein you can and want to digest at night.
So if you see that you're getting into that loop, what is an action that you can take?
Best constraints, keep the protein at night. You might not be able to digest them, but to digest them, you're going to have to change your behavior, your state.
So you just have to wait till dinner to eat, basically.
For example, limit the carbs during the day, have more protein at night. Find a way to digest it. I see that a lot. Like once they start to stop the protein at night, that's when the crash happens every time.
Mm-hmm.
Every single time. You can tell the state you're in by the amount of protein you eat at night. So find a way to eat the protein at night. That means eat less carbs during the day, less stuff that are going to fill you.
Also, don't eat right before dinner.
Stop having carbs an hour before dinner. But that's not because you're hungry. That's because you're tricking yourself into not having protein because the sympathetic is taking over and wants to win. Therefore, he wants to annihilate the parasympathetic, which is that righteous war we are talking about in the podcast. It's the same thing. Is one of the anxiety is a driver, and it is the biggest driver in human physiology. I mean, not human, in physiology in general. Anxiety is key. Anxiety is a function. It's a driver toward taking action. So once he starts to go into a loop, he will win. And he will look for enemies. And one enemy is the parasympathetic side because he acts as a handbrake on the sympathetic. And boom.
So for example, for someone that's completely on the other side, is more towards the depressed side, and finds himself pounding a lot of protein at night and wakes up super slow and doesn't know how to wake up. So what would you advise for someone like that?
That's to lower a bit the protein, to go towards things that are easier to digest, but most
Get some
importantly,
veggies on the side or something?
Yeah, have veggies. Most importantly, do not use it as a fix. At that moment, you're having more protein to zonk yourself out into the state you want to be in, which is a depressed state. So that's really what the danger is you have found a parasympathetic fix. Fixes are always bad. So what you're doing right now is you're having anxiety, but every time you have anxiety, you nuke it completely by forcing a response from the body. That is not the way out. The only way out is to match environment, is to match observation and prediction. That's the only way. Action. Using food instead of action is one of the most dangerous things that I see. That's when I talk about fixes all the time. Mm-hmm. It's very, very, very dangerous. And so that's the key, is don't use protein to zonk yourself out. And because you're going to need more and more and more to the point you can't digest it. Now you're going to have a sympathetic reaction, which makes you feel worse. And then it just snowballs completely into a very dangerous zone. But what I've seen mostly was people just going up on carbs to the point where they have no protein at night, then they crash completely. And so in that case, when you crash completely, honestly, fasting. Fasting will be by far the best thing we can do. You fast, you clean up the system.
So how would you approach the fasting?
Have maybe some fats in the morning and then nothing till dinner or at night with protein.
Yeah.
But at least you'll stop the swings a bit. So you'll have too much protein at night, but at least you're going to clear the system during the day until you can find balance eventually. It's not fast necessarily, and there's no magic pill. But at least the fasting is going to remind you that you're hungry, and being hungry forces a sympathetic reaction.
You're just resetting the system, right?
Yeah, that's all you're doing, which works very well. So
I like fasting.
Yeah, fasting is a great
I
way
like
of resetting the
fasting
system.
sometimes.
Whenever you're in a place you don't like to be, fasting. Stop all carbs, have just protein at night with some veggies, and be hungry during the day. That will help more than anything else. It's very effective.
I like fasting once in a while, like to reset the system,
Like
or in specific
to-
moments. Yes,
You'll
I think it's
notice that
awesome.
if you only have protein at night, you will not overeat that.
Mm-hmm.
The reason you overeat is because you can do it because you have so much carbs during the day that forces that digestive system to be constantly on, which allows you to lose connection with the hungry, not hungry feeling. So you overeat protein. You overeat protein, but there are signals in your body telling you you're overeating protein, except at that moment you're ignoring them.
Mm-hmm.
So the fasting is going to allow you to start being conscious of those signals again, which is a very important part of the process. So, long story short, that's how I would do it. Sounds good?
Sounds good. Thank
Everybody,
you guys.
see you on the next one.